Konbawa, a rare time I'm actually making this video at night, as it is now time for week 18 of the 2017 PFA season, the week of December 17th through 18th, as we're down to the final 3 weeks as we get closer and closer to the playoffs. So we start off by taking a look at the standings after week 17. In the National East, it's the Manhattan Greens leading the Cleveland Bulldogs by a game, and it's the Omaha Thunder leading the Denver Miners by a game in the National Central, and then Birmingham Hornets have the tiebreaker over the Jacksonville Bucks in the National South, and then the Oakland Majors having a 2-game lead over the the Phoenix Storm in the National West. And then the Pittsburgh Blitz already won the division as they got a 3.5 game lead over the Cincinnati Colts. And then the Chicago 71ers have the quarter game lead over the Oklahoma Oilers in the Century Central. The Miami Sharks have a half game lead over the Dallas Stars in the Century South. And El Paso has a 1.5 game lead, or 2.5 game lead, over the Seattle Quakes in the Century West. As right now, the Blitz still remain the only team in the playoffs, but there's a lot of playoff implication games later today. And then we take a look at the schedule for Week 18 as we start off with the San Diego Rays visiting the Chicago 71ers, then Buffalo visiting Cincinnati, then a huge National Conference showdown matchup between two teams fighting for the playoff spot as it's Jacksonville visiting Cleveland, Pittsburgh visiting Columbus, Las Vegas visiting Dallas, an important game for Dallas to get into the playoffs. Orlando going to Houston, another big one, Oklahoma, Kansas City, Century Central showdown as Oklahoma's trying to get into the playoffs. Detroit at Louisville, another game with playoff implications. Boston and Manhattan, another game with playoff implications. Then Indianapolis at Omaha, another game with playoff implications. And then after that, a big one as Miami visits San Antonio in an interconference showdown, for another playoff implications. Then the 4 p.m. games, New Orleans going to Birmingham, playoff implications. Washington at Los Angeles, playoff implications. Hawaii at Phoenix, playoff implications. And Seattle at San Francisco, playoff implications. My God. And then we get our Sunday night game, which is Baltimore at Denver, which has playoff implications. And we finish off with the Monday night game, Minneapolis going to Philadelphia. So let's get Week 18 underway. So we start off the week in Soldier Field as the Chicago 71ers host the San Diego Rays, as a win or later on Oklahoma loss if needed will clinch a playoff spot for Chicago as they're trying to get a playoff spot, win the division, and get first round bye and home field advantage. And they would win it 17-9 defensive struggle as they clinch a playoff spot to join the Pittsburgh Blitz as the only 2 teams in the playoffs right now. So much for having a hangover from losing PFA Bowl 1. They're right back in the mix. As unfortunately, Matthew Smart is questionable for next week as he suffered an injury. San Diego's wide receiver David Setton, 6 receptions, 124 yards. And Chicago's wide receiver is Alan Fernandez, 3 receptions, 110 yards and a touchdown. And Raymond Hughes, 4 receptions and 103 yards. And Chicago's defensive end, Alfred Helms, continues to have a dominant season. 19 tackles, 5 sacks, and 1 forced fumble, which is the 9th most tackles in the game. So a big win for Chicago as they are now in the playoffs. Then we head east to Cincinnati in the rain as a Century East showdown as the Buffalo Sabres visit the Cincinnati Colts. A matchup between 2 teams that are long eliminated from the playoffs, and this is just bragging rights between the 2. And Cincinnati would shut out Buffalo 16-0 in the 9th lowest scoring game in PFA history as Buffalo suffers their first ever losing season. Cincinnati's running back Quentin Peterson, 19 carries for 136 yards and a touchdown, and Buffalo's strong safety Nathaniel Parker with 12 tackles. Neither team really did that good except for Cincinnati's defense as they got to 8-8 as Buffalo suffered their first losing season as their miserable season continues. After that, we go up north a bit to Cleveland, still on that same weather pattern in the rain, as is a huge National Conference showdown as the Jacksonville Bucks visit the Cleveland Bulldogs. This is pretty big. If Jacksonville wins, not only will they clinch a playoff spot, but they will give the National East to the Manhattan Greens, who need to win and a Cleveland loss to get the division, as they're both trying to end 2 long losing streaks for their team that's hurting their chances to get into the playoffs. Cleveland would get their revenge from last year as they win 41-28 in an offensive shootout as they prevent both Jacksonville from clinching the playoffs and the Manhattan Greens from winning the National East another week, as Jacksonville's quarterback Michael Witters finally came back with 16-25, 307 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Cleveland's quarterback Scott Hernandez was 23-32, 464 yards and 5 touchdowns. That is the most passing yards in a game, and it is by a mile. Wow. And then, of course, Jacksonville's wide receiver Emmanuel Gallant, 3 receptions, 152 yards and a touchdown. And Cleveland's wide receivers, first-round pick Ron Marlone, 5 receptions, 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Gerald Todd, 3 receptions, 141 yards and 2 touchdowns. Big win for Cleveland as they prevent Jacksonville and Manhattan from getting to the playoffs, as now they are in the 6th seed at the moment in the National Conference playoffs. Then we go down to Columbus for a Century East showdown as the Pittsburgh Blitz visit the Columbus Barons. Pittsburgh already clinched a playoff spot. Now they're trying to get in a good seeding position since that Chicago win earlier. They can no longer get home field advantage, but they can still get first round bye if they win out and a couple things go their way. So they're trying to win out before they go on their bye week this upcoming week. Pittsburgh would dominate in the fourth quarter to win it 30-10 as their rookie quarterback Gerald Putman was 17-24, 274 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. And their wide receiver Gary Berry was 4 receptions, 121 yards and a touchdown. And their defensive end Charlie Weber, 11 tackles and 5 sacks, completely shutting down Columbus going into the fourth quarter as they move to 11-6 to go on their bye week as they're focused on their final Sunday night game at Washington to get their better seed position as Columbus still continues on their losing streak. Then we go down to Dallas for a Century Conference showdown as the Las Vegas Gamblers visit the Dallas Stars. For Dallas, if they win and if Seattle lost, they will clinch a playoff spot for the first time ever, but they gotta hold off against the Gamblers who they beat earlier this year. But Las Vegas would destroy them 27-6 as that was a huge loss for Dallas. It's starting to look like last year too when they were 11-5 and they lost their final 2 games when they could have made the playoffs if they won one. Oh boy. Las Vegas' quarterback Keith Belcher, 16-30, 260 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. And their wide receiver John Maxwell, 4 receptions, 148 yards and a touchdown. And Dallas linebacker Victor Shores had 12 tackles. A big win for Las Vegas, although they're eliminated from the playoffs. And a huge loss for Dallas as their playoff hopes are still very, very up in the air with Seattle and Detroit still right behind them. Then we go down to Houston for a Century South showdown as the Orlando Astros visits the Houston Twisters as Houston has the stadium enclosed to generate as much pressure for Orlando as Orlando continues to suffer their losing streak as they embarrassingly miss the playoffs as Houston out of nowhere starting to look a little bit better these last bunch of weeks. And Houston would get the win 38-23 and a spanking as Orlando's quarterback Milton Hester was 25-38, 292 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Stephen Hargrove, Houston's quarterback, was 15-20, 270 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's been on a roll these last few weeks. Orlando's running back Frank Heavens was 24 attempts, 107 yards, and Houston's running back Joseph Bolin, 24 carries, 96 yards and 2 touchdowns, and 5 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown. So he had a huge day. Orlando's linebacker James Lyons, 14 tackles and a sack, and Houston's linebacker Juan McKnight, 12 tackles and a sack. Big win for Houston, another disappointing loss for Orlando as both their seasons continue to look very disappointing. Then we go out to Kansas City as the Kansas City Hammerheads host the Oklahoma Oilers in a big Century Central showdown. Kansas City already long eliminated, but Oklahoma, if they get this win, they will clinch a playoff spot for the first time ever, and if not, a Detroit loss will get them in. But the game would be an epic disaster as Kansas City would not only win 39-21, Wiley Chester, their starting quarterback, injured, and he's going to be out the next week or so. So now both him and Peter Rose are out for next week. So their backup, their third string, Laverne Araxo, is going to be the starting quarterback. He's just as good overall-wise as both of them, so he should be solid in that first start. But now they got to get another quarterback to be his backup. Oh my God, the injuries for them still just won't stop piling up. Kansas City's quarterback, Henry Settles, 36 of 51, 403 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. ninth most passing yards in the game for him in league history. Oklahoma's wide receiver Paul Hillman, 4 receptions, 140 yards and a touchdown. Kansas City's wide receiver Reginald Jones, 10 receptions, 116 yards. And Orlando's linebacker James Baxter, 15 tackles. Their quarterback Marcel Pope, 11 tackles. And their other linebacker Matt Duff, 10 tackles. Their defense did a lot of work, but in the end it just wasn't enough as they got blown out. As they're not in the playoffs yet, but if Detroit loses, they still can get in despite this loss. A big win for Kansas City, though, and a major disappointment for Oklahoma. They better hope their quarterbacks be ready for the playoffs if they make it in. Then we go up to Louisville for an Outer Conference showdown between the two worst teams going into the season. Now they're in very good tracks as we're going to see two very good quarterbacks going against each other as the Detroit Engines visit the Louisville Saints, one of the strong offenses going against one of the strong defenses in the league. How about that? As Detroit's Charles Cunningham's going to go up against Louisville's Stanford Fink. This is going to be very interesting between the two top picked quarterbacks in the draft. And of course, this is big for Detroit because if they lose, they are officially eliminated, so they need to win out to have any shot of making the playoffs. And Louisville would get the victory set 27-17 as they've now won, I believe, 3 in a row as Detroit's lost 5 in a row now. And with this loss, not only are the Engines officially eliminated from the playoffs, but the Oklahoma Oilers, despite the loss, have officially clinched their very first playoff berth, as now the goal is to try and get the Century Central away from Chicago, although that's not going to be in their favor at all with that loss today, Chicago's victory. But anyways, check out the quarterbacks. Detroit's quarterback, Charles Cunningham, 39, 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Louisville's quarterback, Stanford Fink, 16 of 27, 182 yards, 3 touchdowns to the pick. So you got to wonder who did better of the rookies. Detroit's wide receiver, Joseph Chavez, who finally came back, 9 receptions, 105 yards and a touchdown. He's missed a bunch of weeks due to injury. And Louisville's linebacker, Larry Mercier, 16 tackles and a sack. So very impressive finish so far this year for the Saints. Looking very good maybe to make a playoff run maybe in 2018. Another very disappointing loss for Detroit as just nothing's going right for them after that just unbelievable 9-3 start. You got to wonder if they're going to be in trouble going into the next year, although that offense is still clicking very well. Then we go out to East Rutherford as the Boston Destroyers visit their division foe, the Manhattan Greens. Manhattan was hoping to win the division today, but with Cleveland's win today, that's impossible as they still themselves cannot clinch a playoff berth either. They need to win out. They have any shot at getting that along with first round bye and maybe home field advantage as they would host a title game if they make it all the way there. And Manhattan would get the victory 28-17 as they improved to 12-4. Manhattan's quarterback Jamie Norwood was 12 of 22, 209 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Boston's running back David Pogue was 31 carries, 111 yards and 2 touchdowns, which I think is the best day for a running back in Boston franchise history. Manhattan's wide receiver David Nato, 5 receptions, 133 yards, and their linebacker Juan Jones, 16 tackles, and their cornerback Fernando Pelter had 11 tackles. Boston put up a very good fight in the first half, but in the end they just couldn't keep up with Manhattan. A big win for them. So now it's set pretty much for Manhattan next week. If they win or Cleveland loses, they will finally clinch a playoff spot, the National East, and maybe first round bye, depending on what happens with Omaha and Oakland. We'll have to see about that later on tonight. Then we go out to Omaha for a big National Central showdown as the Indianapolis Express visits the Omaha Thunder, as Indianapolis are still in the playoffs. However, if they lose to Omaha today, they will be officially eliminated, as Omaha is trying to end their 5-game winning streak to try and get back into the playoff hunt to win the division, because it's not looking good with Indianapolis and Denver still behind them. Omaha would dominate as they made Indianapolis their bitch as they won 38-3 in the 6th most lopsided game in PFA history, as they knocked Indianapolis out of the playoffs, which is just what they wanted. Their quarterback, Archie Marvin, was 13 of 15, 223 yards and a touchdown. Their wide receiver, Stephen Carmona, 6 receptions, 114 yards and a touchdown. And Indianapolis' strong safety, Otis Moses, had 13 tackles. They actually knocked Rodney Sanders out of the game, which was quite impressive defensively. So a big win for them, finally ending their 5-game win streak as they're trying to get back into the playoffs, win the division. and maybe if they're lucky get into the first round bye contention, although that's run out of time now probably. And a huge loss for Indianapolis as they're officially eliminated from the playoffs. So now Omaha has left to worry about is Denver to win the division. Then we go out to San Antonio for the final 1 p.m. game, and it's a big one as the Miami Sharks visit the San Antonio Longhorns as San Antonio's trying to keep up against Cleveland for a wild card spot, and they still also could possibly win the division in the National South, believe it or not. They still could take it away from either Jacksonville or Birmingham. It's still up in the air as Miami is trying to get the win to keep up against Dallas in the division and possibly make a playoff appearance if they win, and I think Seattle losing too. And San Antonio would get it in a surprisingly defensive struggle. Wow, neither quarterback did really anything good. It was all of Elvis Smith, San Antonio's running back, who continued to have a dominant back-to-back weeks. 22 carries, 175 yards and a touchdown, as he has the third most rushing yards in the game now. Unbelievable, as their wide receiver Scott Lopez was 4 receptions, 119 yards and a touchdown. Miami's linebacker Anthony Lewis had 12 tackles, and San Antonio's defensive end Harvey Crawford had 10 tackles and a sack. A big win for San Antonio, as now they're back in the driver's seat for that last wild card spot against Cleveland, and they still could get the division. It's still up in the air, believe it or not. It's unbelievable, as Miami, another tough loss, as although they have the lead in the Century South still. And not only did they got to worry about Dallas, but they got to worry about San Antonio and El Paso and Pittsburgh coming in to take away the possibility of a first-round bye, because it's not looking good for them either. They've not been kind of disappointing so far this year. Then we get to our 4 p.m. games going down to Birmingham as the New Orleans Jazz visits the Birmingham Hornets, as Birmingham needs the win to keep their lead against Jacksonville in the division and keep their 1-game lead over Manhattan for a possible home field advantage. But believe it or not, even if they win, they still are not in the playoffs. That's unbelievable. 13-3 and still not into the playoffs. This is unbelievable. So we get into the game, and Birmingham would get the victory 17-9 as they get closer to winning a playoff appearance, as they've matched their win total from last year. Birmingham's rookie quarterback Ollie Burke was 21 of 32, 229 yards and 2 touchdowns. New Orleans linebacker Keith Garcia had 11 tackles and 2 sacks, and Birmingham's linebacker Christopher Vela had 10 tackles. Then we go way out west to Los Angeles as we got a National Conference showdown as the Washington Americans visit the Los Angeles Angels, as Washington's been eliminated, but believe it or not, Los Angeles still has a shot to make the playoffs. They have to win out, and hopefully Oakland and Phoenix lose out, as their backup quarterback is still very impressive, but now he's got to go up against a really strong defense in Washington, as they brought back Roy Rice back in to be the quarterback. Washington's defense would single-handedly knock out Los Angeles from the playoffs as they win 30-7, completely shutting down Los Angeles offense. They couldn't get anything going, despite the fact that Roy Rice was terrible himself. Washington's defensive end, Ira Washington, 13 tackles and 3 sacks. Los Angeles' linebacker, Julius Searcy, 11 tackles, and their strong safety, Daniel Stewart, had 13 tackles and a sack. Los Angeles' defense did a good job too, but they just couldn't stop Washington's just onslaught, as this is their first ever losing season, as they've already been eliminated from the playoffs. So now it's just Phoenix and Oakland fighting for the National West. Then we go out to Oakland as the Oakland Majors host the Tampa Tropics. Oakland, if they win and Phoenix loses now, they can clinch a playoff spot and the National West. And I mean, come on, they're hosting Tampa. It shouldn't be that hard, right? Turns out it was, as Tampa destroyed Oakland 24-10, as both quarterbacks did really good. Tampa's backup quarterback, Stuart Collin, 21-29, 239 yards and 3 touchdowns in his second start. Oakland's quarterback, Ruben Williams, was 13-25, 243 yards and a touchdown. Oakland's fullback, David Burris, 1 carry for 2 yards, but 3 receptions for 109 yards. He had a big day. And Tampa's defensive end, Robert Hoskins, really applied the pressure today. 12 tackles, 3 sacks, and a forced fumble, which was recovered. And Oakland's linebacker, Paul Laurer, 11 tackles and a sack. A big win for Tampa, as they now won 2 in a row. Ugh. Very disappointing for Oakland, as they now lost another game, as their lead in the division is just disappearing, as it's getting tough for them to get into the playoffs. Now they got to worry about not only no longer being able to get to the top 2 seeds, but they got to watch out for Omaha now taking over the 3rd seed. Then we go out to Phoenix as the Hawaii Phantoms visits the Phoenix Storm, as Hawaii's already been long eliminated as their losing record still continues to pile up, losing 7 in a row, as Phoenix now won 3 in a row as they're trying to come back to win the division over Oakland. That was a big loss, big victory for Phoenix as Oakland lost. Now they need to win to get within a game of them. And Phoenix would once again win as they win 4 in a row, as Hawaii now lost 8 in a row as they won 30-14. Very competitive until the 4th quarter where Phoenix just applied the pressure. Hawaii's quarterback Richard Clough was 24-34, 344 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. Phoenix's quarterback James Cruz, big day, 20-32, 248 yards, 4 touchdowns, and just a pick. Hawaii's wide receiver Eric Faye, 4 receptions, 142 yards, and a score. And Phoenix's wide receiver Juan Langley, 7 receptions for 121 yards. Big for Phoenix as they now won 4 in a row, got back to 500, and are now within a game of Oakland. Another disappointing loss for Hawaii as their losses just still continue to pile up. Then we go up to Santa Clara as we got a big Century West showdown as the Seattle Quakes visit the San Francisco Union as San Francisco's already been eliminated. Seattle's trying to win to get within contention to get the playoff spot as they're the only team remaining looking outside, getting in on the Century Conference side. And San Francisco would get the win 23-21 as they didn't knock out Seattle yet. They're still in the playoffs, thankfully, because of Dallas losing. If Dallas won, Seattle would have been eliminated, but that didn't happen as they still can get a shot. And they still can get the Century West off of El Paso, so we got to watch out for that. As Seattle's rookie quarterback Jody Tucker was 21-30 for 284 yards and a touchdown. San Francisco's quarterback John Getz finally came back, was 25-39, 252 yards and a touchdown. Seattle's wide receiver Eric Benjamin, 6 receptions, 129 yards and a touchdown. And San Francisco's wide receiver Bill Presley out of nowhere, 8 receptions, 115 yards, never heard of him before till now. And Seattle's linebacker James Torres, 13 tackles and a sack. And Seattle's kicker Richmond Roman missed 2 field goals that would have won the game, but thankfully for him, they were both, one was from 40 yards out, the other was from 50 yards out, so they were very long ones, so you can't necessarily blame him for missing chip shots or anything like that, but in the end, that's 2 missed field goals and one of them would have won the game. So it sucks for Seattle losing as they've now ended their, I think it was a 5-game win streak. San Francisco has tied it up now with them in Las Vegas and Seattle in the Century West. Oh my goodness. But then we get to Sunday night as the Baltimore Charm visit the Denver Miners in what I thought at least, was going to be a preview of PFA Bowl 2. In the end, both teams disappointed. Baltimore's already been eliminated. Denver still is in it, although they're going to have to really, really win out and hope Omaha loses out for them to have any shot to get the playoffs, as the only way they can get in now is by winning the division. And Denver would beat Baltimore 21-17 to give Baltimore their first ever losing season. Baltimore had the lead going into the second half, but Denver pulled it off in his 3rd quarter. Baltimore's quarterback Andrew Lassiter was knocked out of the game too. He'll be back next week though, thankfully, but man, that sucks for them. And their final game, as Denver's quarterback Zachary Ellis was 27-35, 349 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 picks. Baltimore's wide receiver Ariel Leary, 4 receptions, 103 yards. Denver's running back Kevin Teeter, 13 carries for 33 yards, but 6 receptions for 111 yards. He had a big game. Baltimore's defensive end Hollis Haynes, 10 tackles and a fumble recovered. And Denver's defensive end Craig Early, 8 tackles and 3 sacks. So that was a big win for Denver, as they're still in the playoffs, although it's very slim, and a disappointing loss for Baltimore as they gotta go play San Francisco next week to finish their season. And then we get to our Monday night game between 2 teams that we thought were going to be in the playoff hunt, but both were long eliminated, as it's the Minneapolis Kitsune visiting the Philadelphia Hawks, between one of the strongest offenses and defenses going against each other, although both teams have really struggled this year, especially Philadelphia. Their offense has not been really as effective. Minneapolis' defense has not been really as effective either, but they're still somehow being around 500. And Minneapolis would get the victory 21-10 as they shut down Philadelphia's offense pretty good, as both teams only scored in each quarter. as Minneapolis' rookie quarterback Michael Fields was 20 of 33, 304 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He had one of his best games of his rookie so far. Their wide receiver, Alan Fernandez, was 7 receptions for 108 yards. And finally, good news for Minneapolis, their linebacker, Francis Negrete, who's missed the last 12 weeks, finally came back as he got 11 tackles in his return. So a nice win for Minneapolis as they're trying to at least get over 500 for the first time ever to finish their season, as the disappointing 2017 season continues for Philadelphia as they lost another game. And with that, Week 18 is in the books as we now take a look at the standings. As in the National East, Manhattan still leads Cleveland by 1 game. Omaha leads Denver by 1 game still in the National Central. Birmingham still leads Jacksonville by 1 game in the National South. Oakland still leads Phoenix by 1 game in the National West. Pittsburgh has a 3-game lead over Cincinnati in the Century East, although they've already clinched the playoffs, division, so it doesn't matter. And then the Chicago 71ers have a game-half lead over the Oilers, and the Century Central is both teams now made to the playoffs. Miami has a quarter-game lead over Dallas in the Century South, and El Paso has the 2-game lead over Seattle in the Century West. As now 3 teams are in, no one's still from the National Conference, which is unbelievable, but believe it or not, I think all the playoff spots might finally get settled this coming week. So we now start off with the playoff implications as we look at the National Conference bracket, as it's still Birmingham and Manhattan with the top 2 seeds, with San Antonio now going to Omaha and Jacksonville going to Oakland now, with just Cleveland, Denver, and Phoenix the only remaining teams looking in. First off, playoff clinching, we start off with Birmingham. If they win and Jacksonville loses, that is it. They clinch they clinch a playoff spot, and they will clinch the National South. And if that happens also, they will clinch first round bye too. And if Manhattan loses next week, they will get home field advantage all wrapped up, and that would mean the the National Conference playoffs will have to go through Birmingham to get to the PFA Bowl too. Then we get to Manhattan. All they have to do is either win or Cleveland loses, and they will clinch a playoff spot and first round on the National East for the first time ever. And if they win or Omaha loses, they will get first round bye, believe it or not. So wouldn't that be something? Kind of like the Vikings this last season, as the host team being only 2 games away from hosting the title game. And then we get to Omaha. If they win and Denver loses, they will get into the playoffs and clinch the National Central. And if that happens and Oakland loses, they will get the 3rd seed all wrapped up. And then for Oakland, they have to win, and Phoenix has to lose, and that will clinch them the playoff spot and the National West for the first time ever. But of course, if they lose and Phoenix loses or whatever, Omaha, they'll be stuck at the 4th seed regardless, no matter what. For Jacksonville, if they beat Cleveland next week, they will be in the playoffs. That's in terms of playoff clinching scenarios. And of course, Cleveland, if they lose, of course, they can no longer get to the National East, but they still would be in the playoff hunt. Denver, if they lose and Omaha wins, they are officially eliminated. And if Phoenix loses and Oakland wins, they are also officially eliminated from the playoffs. So we can finally have 5 of the 6 spots in the National Conference side finally wrapped up. So next week, I can't wait to see that. And then we go over to the Century Conference, as it's now Chicago and El Paso with the bye, believe it or not, because of Miami screw-ups, as it would be Dallas now going to Miami and Oklahoma going to Pittsburgh, with Seattle being the final team looking in to the playoffs, as it's just the 7 teams remaining. Now Chicago, they clinched their playoff spot this week, but if they win, that's it. They clinch the Century Central, and they'll get first round bye and home field advantage. All they have to do is win 1 more game or hope that Miami, El Paso, and Oklahoma, all 3 of them lose to get in. But all they have to do is win, and they get home field advantage wrapped up again for the 2nd year in a row. For El Paso, they either have to win or Seattle has to lose, and they will get a playoff spot and the Century West for the first time ever. But they can't clinch first round bye or home field advantage or anything like that yet. For Miami, if they win or Seattle loses, they are in the playoffs. And if they win or Dallas loses, they will clinch the Century South for the first time ever. Pittsburgh cannot clinch anything else except either the 2nd, 3, or 4th seed, so anything can go this week. And of course, Oklahoma's already in the playoffs, but if they lose or Chicago wins, they are stuck as a wild card team. But if they win out and if they win and Dallas loses, they will officially clinch the 5th seed. And then finally, Dallas, if they win or Seattle loses, they will finally clinch a playoff spot for the first time ever. And then for Seattle, if they lose or El Paso wins, they can no longer clinch the division. And if Dallas wins too and they lose, or Dallas wins, they will be officially eliminated from the playoffs. But if they win and Dallas loses, they still might be a shot for them to still maybe get a wild card spot off of Dallas, but we'll have to wait and see on that. So all the spots in the Century Conference could be wrapped up after this week, as half of them already are set with Chicago, Pittsburgh, and Oklahoma. And then we finally take a look at the Week 19 schedule, as it's going to be on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day too. We start off with San Francisco going to Baltimore as they play their final game this season, for Baltimore at least. Then Columbus going to Buffalo. And then the big one, Kansas City going to Chicago. Chicago win and they clinch everything. Then another big one, Cleveland going to Jacksonville, the rematch from last week, as this is a big game for both of them, as Jacksonville can get in and help Manhattan get in if they win. Tampa going to Louisville. Miami going to New Orleans. If they win, they are in and they clinch the division. And Cincinnati going to Oklahoma. That's going to be important for Oklahoma in terms of seeding at least, although they might have the 5th seed all wrapped up by then, possibly, maybe. El Paso going to Orlando. That's a big one for their division. And Birmingham going to San Antonio. That's going to be huge, too, for playoff implications for San Antonio and playoff implications for Birmingham, and maybe get home field advantage all wrapped up, possibly. And then we get to the 4 p.m. games with Indianapolis going to Dallas. That's a big one for Dallas to get into the playoffs. Milwaukee going to Denver. That could be big as they're still in the playoff hunt. Portland going to Hawaii. Atlanta going to Minneapolis. Boston going to Phoenix. That's big for playoff implications as Phoenix are still in it. Las Vegas going to San Diego. Houston going to Seattle. That's big as Seattle is still in the playoff hunt. And then Omaha going to Washington. Omaha can get the 1st seed all wrapped up and maybe clinch the division with a win and Denver loss. And then we get to our Sunday night game as Manhattan visits Philadelphia, with possibly the division and first round bye all wrapped up by then too, so you gotta watch out for that. And then the final Monday night game on Christmas Day as Los Angeles visits Oakland, with Oakland having the possibility to clinch the National West on Christmas night. And with that, PFA's Week 18 is in the books. I cannot wait for Week 19 to see possibly even more huge, probably almost all the playoff spots all wrapped up. And of course, can't wait to see that too. So see you soon and for Week 19.